This video is intended for learners and supervisors, so I recommend both the learner and the supervisor watch this together. The video is going to be broken down into two parts. The first part is going to be about what you must fulfill to supervise a learner, i.e. license requirements, insurance, etc. Fines, can you use your phone whilst you're teaching, that sort of thing. And the second part is going to be about how to actually help supervise the learner driver. I've made a list so I don't miss anything off. The first thing is anyone supervising a learner must hold a full UK driving licence and must have held it for at least 3 years. It doesn't have to be UK, it can be within the EU, including Switzerland, Norway, Iceland or Liechtenstein. It doesn't matter how much driving experience you've had, what matters is that you've had that UK or EU licence, including those other countries, Switzerland, Norway, Iceland or Liechtenstein, for at least 3 years. If you drive without a supervisor and you have a provisional driving licence, you can be fined up to £1,000 and get 6 penalty points on your licence. And yes, that's you, the provisional licence holder, the learner, who can get fined that, not just the supervisor. In fact, you wouldn't be with a supervisor, would you? So they wouldn't get fined anything. What I'm trying to say is, just because you hold a provisional licence, it doesn't mean that you're free to do things illegally. You still have to abide by the law. You can drive with as many passengers as you like in the car, as long as your car is able to hold that many people. You can't stuff 4 people in the back of a car that's only meant to take 3. Although you may want to question how many people you want with you when you're learning to drive. I don't think having a full car would necessarily help you. The supervisor doesn't actually need to be insured on the car, although I recommend the supervisor is insured just in case they need to take over. It's the person driving the car who needs to be insured. And another note I want to make is some insurance companies don't accept supervisors who are under 25 years old. Because to be a supervisor, you have to be a minimum of 21 years old and have held the full UK EU driving licence for at least 3 years. But some insurance companies won't insure you if you're under 25 years old, or won't allow you to supervise your learner if you're under 25. So obviously the learner who is insuring themselves on that car needs to make sure that they're able to have you as a supervisor, that you're old enough to supervise them. Worth checking that one out. You can get an unlimited fine and be banned from driving and get up to 8 penalty points on your driving licence if you drive without insurance. That's not just for provisional licence holders, but that's for everyone. So I really recommend you get insurance. You have to, it's the law. I recommend Collingwood and Confused.com, but more on them later. As I say, I'm just getting through this list to make sure I don't miss anything off, because this is important. This is the legal stuff when it comes to supervising someone to learn to drive. Automatic, that's a good one. If you have an automatic licence, doesn't matter how long you've had that automatic licence, you cannot supervise someone in a manual car. Another thing on licences as well, you have to have a full licence for the category of car or vehicle that you're supervising in. So if you're supervising someone in a car, you must have a full car licence, category B. But if you're doing something like a lorry, a truck, I don't know much about trucks and lorries and all different categories, but you must have the same category of licence for which you are supervising. Yeah, very obvious this one, but you mustn't be under the influence of alcohol or drugs whilst you are supervising. You shouldn't use, well, you must not use your phone as well, because when you're supervising someone to drive, you are partly responsible and you should be in a fit state to drive yourself. So you can't say to someone, oh, you're going to take me down the pub, you have a load of drinks, oh, it doesn't matter, I'm not driving home, I'm going to get this provisional licence holding learner to drive me home. No, doesn't work like that. Neither can you start talking, making phone calls whilst you're supervising. You should be in the same state that you should be in when you're actually driving. And you cannot use motorways during private practice. And that's another distinction I want to make, is supervising someone is known as private practice. So if I say private practice in this video, that's what I mean. You could say, well, learning with a driving instructor is also private practice, and you're right, it is. But when driving instructors and the industry in general refer to private practice, they're talking about a learner driver learning with a friend or family member. And finally, you must display L plates. In Wales, you have the option to display a D plate. I don't know the Welsh language, but I guess learner in Welsh begins with a D. So you must have that L plate or D plate on the car. D plate for Wales only, not in the rest of the UK. And this is UK wide whilst you're learning. The car must be legal too, so it must have an MOT and tax, etc., which of course is the case when you're driving any car on the road. Now I want to move on to how you can help your learner driver drive when you're supervising them. Firstly, give directions early and very clearly. Driving instructors use the ADI system, alert, direct, identify. To give you an example of that, alert would be at the roundabout, at the end of the road, take the next road, take the second road on the, that's the direction. So at the roundabout, you'll be going left first exit. So the alert is at the roundabout, at the traffic lights, etc. And then the direction is the direction you're going to tell them to go. At the end of the road, turn right. And then after that, if you can identify something to make it easier, that's a good bonus. So please take the second road on the right. It's just before the red post box, just after the bus stop. It's near the zebra crossing, that kind of thing. Sometimes it's hard though, because sometimes you're on a plain road where there isn't anything distinctive to point out, in which case you may want to use like a time. So say it's going to be within the next so many seconds. Try not to use yards. Most people's heads don't work with yards and they won't know what you mean. But if you give them an idea of how many seconds away it is roughly, that can help people slow down appropriately for it. It's also important not to drive when the learner feels uncomfortable. So if it's rush hour and they don't want to drive in rush hour, don't force them to. Obviously you're constrained by when you're available to take them out, but try and time when you take them out with when the roads are more suitable for them. Also agree where you're going to go. If the learner wants to avoid a particular area, wants to avoid a roundabout, then best avoid that. Agree what routes you're going to take. Don't suddenly spring on them. Let's say you live in East End of London. Don't suddenly go, we're going to Birmingham. That's probably not going to help them. So make sure the learner understands what kinds of roads they're going to be dealing with, and that will hopefully help them feel more relaxed. I find that for private practice, many short sessions are better than fewer really long sessions as well. So if you can take the learner out often, but only say for 20 minutes, that's going to be more helpful than once a week for an hour and a half. You can do every day 20 minutes. That's going to help the learner immensely. Remember that the learner only has hours of practice, yet the supervisor should have years of practice. So as a supervisor, you need to understand that the learner is going to take longer to do everything. They're going to take longer to speed up, to slow down. They're going to need longer just getting in the car and setting it up. They're going to take longer at junctions. They need bigger opportunities. Be patient with them. Don't rush them. If you need to be somewhere in a hurry, you shouldn't be supervising a learner, because if you're pressuring them to do things more quickly, that's not going to help them. They already feel like that because of everybody else on the road. Most learners feel under pressure not to hold people up. If the supervisor's also doing that, that's going to compound the issue. And that issue does lead to worse driving and does make people take longer learning to drive. If you can actually do the opposite of that and help calm them down and help them take their time, you will find they will learn more quickly, and they will get quicker more quickly. They'll get more proficient at what they do. This is a very important one, chit chat. Generally, when two people are together, quite often they talk. And when you're teaching someone to drive, that can help a little bit, it can help people feel less anxious sometimes if you're talking to them about something other than driving. But it can also be a big distraction. So as a supervisor, you've got to be smart with what you talk about and when you talk about it. So if you're on a really easy stretch of road, then it's okay for you to talk about your uncle's cat or something unrelated to driving. However, when you start getting near something more challenging, stop talking. That's the first step for a supervisor. You want to stop talking about that and anything, start talking about the challenging situation. The second step, which is makes you an even better supervisor, is when you help the learner focus on what they're doing. Most learners will. Most learners, when they see a situation, they will stop talking. They'll actually stop listening to you as a supervisor and start concentrating on the situation. But there is a certain percentage of people who don't. I teach a certain percentage of people when we're coming into a dangerous situation, if they're telling me about their boyfriend's dog or whatever it is they're talking about, they'll keep talking about that and completely be oblivious to what's unfolding ahead. And I'll have to say, hold that thought for a moment, tell me about that later. At the moment, I want you to concentrate on this roundabout or on these temporary traffic lights, etc. You can take it an even further step forward as a supervisor as well and talk about what's relevant on the road. So I don't think it's good to ask too many questions, although a lot of people recommend this, but point things out. Say, that sign up there, that sign means pedestrian crossing. Make sure you can see both sides of the zebra crossing before you pass it. We have some traffic lights coming up. There's some parked cars ahead. Maybe you need to slow down for those parked cars. If you're keeping a door's width or a metre from them, you can do the speed limit or close to the speed limit, but if you're going to get closer, you're going to have to slow down. So you're talking about what's coming. It's almost like commentating on what's ahead. As the learner gets better and more confident, then you can start changing it a bit more to questions like, what does that sign mean? There's parked cars. If you need to get within half a metre, how much do you need to slow down, etc. It's important not to overload your learner with questions though. If you ask them a question and they answer it fine, that's great. You can ask more questions. However, if they're struggling to answer and they're staring ahead and they're not responding, probably better to stop asking questions and go back to guidance. Test the water later, maybe ask them a question when the roads are a bit easier, and you'll gradually ask more questions as they get better. However, in my experience, giving guidance has helped people learn more quickly than asking questions. Despite what the industry tells me, keeps telling me that I need to ask lots of questions to get my learners thinking, quite often they're thinking enough and I need to guide their thinking. Asking questions quite often is distracting, and if they can't answer the question, they tend to feel a bit bad, like, oh what does that mean? What? And their mind is on that instead of driving. Yeah, questions do help once they've already learned, just to try and cement what they've learned in place. But whilst you're trying to teach them, I find it's better to guide them and tell them what to do. Pull over at the side of the road often. Obviously, you can't always do this. It does depend on what kind of road you're on. But try to aim to do it every 10 minutes if you can. And if you're in residential areas, maybe do it a little bit more often than every 10 minutes. And if you're on bigger roads, obviously you're not going to be pulling over. But if you try and average, say if you do an hours of driving, do you want the learner to pull over at the side of the road and move off again 5 or 6 times? Because it's very important practice, and they're going to do it a lot on the test. On the test, they're going to pull over and stop and move away again at least 4 times, quite often 5 or 6 times. And that's going to be in traffic as well with cars coming. So more practice with that actually goes a very long way to helping a new driver pass the driving test. Another good thing about pulling over regularly is it actually gives the learner time to breathe and think, and gives you time to explain anything to them that you need to explain to them. Don't use it as a time to tell them off and tell them everything bad they've done. Sometimes just put them over and say, well, that was great, you did that really well at those traffic lights. Mix it up a little bit. Obviously, you need to tell them and give them advice of things they need to change, things they need to do, but try and go easy on them. Expect a learner driver to drive differently to an experienced driver. A driving instructor is going to teach a learner methods which are easy and require low skill. because new drivers don't have any skill. You gain skill over hours and hours of practice. So for me to try and help someone get a driving license and be safe on the road, I have to teach them in a way that's easy, that requires a low level of skill to do it well, so that they can progress more quickly. If I taught them to rev match and heel and toe, and although I have videos on that on this channel, I don't teach learners how to do that, it would take them a hell of a lot longer to learn. I also don't get them to go down one gear at a time as they approach junctions. Driving instructors have a saying, brakes are for slowing, gears are for going, just because it makes things more simple. Myself, when I drive, I do rev match and I do change down gears one at a time as I approach junctions. And for more experienced drivers, I partially recommend it. I don't think it's that important, but I do find I slow down a little bit better when I'm doing that. But when I try and teach a new driver to do it that way, it does take them longer because there's more steps involved than simply using the brake, clutch down when the revs are low, and then go to the lower gear they need to carry on again. If they're, say, around 10 miles an hour, use second gear. If they're getting less than 5, go to first and carry on. Whatever gear they start in doesn't matter. What matters is the gear they need now to get going. Let's say a situation unfolds and you're a little bit worried. You're thinking, what advice should I give to the learner to make sure when they get that situation, they'll pass their test? There's a multitude of things that can happen on the road, and there's no book that explains what you should do in every situation. But what I would say, and this is what driving instructors do, just use your head, use your common sense. Think, what is safe? What is legal? If there is no perfect solution, pick the best of all the options you can think of, and you will probably be right. This is a controversial one. Taking the wheel, a supervisor taking the wheel whilst the learner is driving. In my earlier days of being a driving instructor, this actually held me back quite a bit, because the recommendation is, what I was trained to do was to avoid taking the wheel unless I absolutely had to. Try and use verbal as much as you can and don't take the wheel. I totally disagree with that now. I find I have far more success from guiding people. Now what I mean by that is, if I don't take the wheel, learner drivers will often want to drive in the hedge, in the ditch, on the farmer's field. They don't want to be on the road with an oncoming bus. They want to be as far away from that oncoming bus as possible, and they feel a lot closer than they actually are. So what I would do when I was an early instructor and I was trained not to take the wheel is I'll be tight, tense, my words would get louder, I'll get more forceful, move more away from the curb, you know, whatever it is on the side, feeling I can't take that wheel. That put me under stress. That put my customer under stress. Our stress started to feed. She was stressed, or he was stressed with the oncoming vehicle, and I was stressed that they were going left. And then what would often happen is at the last moment, I would take the wheel quick before they actually hit something. That's not safe. That doesn't help people. I have got far more success and much happier, nicer lessons just from taking the wheel and guiding them gently. Make sure you tell the learner what you're doing. Give a verbal warning first. Say, you're getting a little bit too close to the hedge there, or the tree, or whatever it is on the side. You might be on a country road, you might be in a residential area, or the parked car. Just get a little bit further away. And quite often than not, in the early stages of learning, they won't. They will quite often get even closer. And then just say, I'm just going to take the wheel now. I'm just going to guide you. Don't worry about the oncoming cars. They are further than you think they are. I'm just going to guide you now and show you where you need to be. And then I may hold the wheel gently just for a few moments just to show them, or even longer, even a matter of 10, 15 seconds, just to get them used to being where they need to be. Because they're going to be afraid. They don't want to be that near to the oncoming cars because they feel closer than they are. But over time, they don't hit those oncoming cars. A bus goes past, a truck goes past, loads of cars go past, and they don't hit any of them. And their brain over time starts to adjust and go, maybe I was wrong. Maybe I wasn't as close to those cars as I thought. And the brain adapts and recalibrates itself. And I find that helps new drivers find good road positioning more quickly than using the mouth. Just guide the wheel a little bit. And also, sometimes they may fight you. You may try to push them more away from the curb and they will fight you back. But just say to them, don't fight me, trust me, you're not as close to those oncoming cars as you feel. I'm going to show you where you need to be. Hold the wheel, try to relax, I'll put you where you need to be, and over time, you will get used to it. If they're fighting you, don't just fight them and ignore it. Point it out to them. I find if you just push back, if you just give it tug of war basically, both trying to take the wheel, nothing normally happens. They carry on doing that and you're forever fighting them. But if you point that out to them, they realise and go, oh yeah, I am. And then they relax on the wheel a little bit and let them show you where to go. When a learner stalls or any tricky situation unfolds, it's important for you to be calm. In fact, the worse the situation gets, the more calm you've got to be. You don't want to be squawking and flapping like a startled chicken. You've got to stay relaxed because you will make the situation worse. The learner is going to be feeling panicked and pressured anyway if they say stall with their nose hanging out in a junction, but you pushing them won't actually resolve the issue any quicker. So the worse the situation is, the more calm you've got to be. Lower your voice tone, more soft voice, instead of being like, quickly, clutch down, no. Just push the clutch down now, everything's okay, turn the engine back on, etc. The worse the situation is, the more calm you've got to be. That's something that takes a long time to get good at when you're teaching people to drive, and if you're only supervising one person, you're probably not going to ever get to a great standard of that, but some people are more talented than others, and maybe you would be like that straight away. But for me, that took a lot of practice. In a difficult situation, I was much more likely to be a bit of a chicken and flap. These days, I've learned to stay calm whatever happens. In fact, the worse situation, the calmer you become. Try not to make learning to drive any harder than it needs to be. There's lots of myths about learning to drive, like that you have to hold the steering wheel at 10 to 2 all the time. That's quite uncomfortable for some people. It's uncomfortable for me as well. I prefer having it a bit lower. You mustn't ever cross your arms. You shouldn't dry steer. Some people detest dry steering. But you can do all those things and still pass your driving tests. Now, of course, if you're supervising someone in your own car, then you don't want them to do things to your car that you don't want them to do. So therefore, you're probably going to want them to avoid doing that kind of thing. But I will say, I do have a learner car with 168,000 miles on it now, from new. I've owned it from new and done lessons with it. And the steering works just fine, and that's in a lot of dry steering. And the tyres last as long as I would ever expect tyres to last. The learner can also help keep a good relationship between supervisor and learner. It's not all down to the supervisor. The supervisor has a tough job themselves of staying calm and being reassuring and helpful. And the learner, when they get stressed out, it's important not to put that on the supervisor. Don't take out your stress on the supervisor. That's quite a common way that the relationship breaks down. Just talk to them in a calm, polite way, preferably when you stopped at the side of the road. Discuss the problem and try and come to terms and resolve it instead of getting all a little bit shouty. If you are a talented driver and you've found learning to drive easy and you've passed your test in under 20 hours of lessons, the best thing you can do to help other people, if you're interested in helping other people, is not boast and shout about that, because that is not normal. Congratulations on you and well done, and enjoy the fact that you found it so easy for sure. But don't make other people feel bad, because most people take a lot more than 20 hours to pass. And generally, you hear the people who have passed quickly shout about it because they're proud and they're very happy about it. So they talk about it, but the people who take longer tend to keep it quiet. So what you hear and what is reality is actually two different things. It's time to wrap this video up. I hope it's helpful. If you think it is, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to get my future videos if you haven't already subscribed. I need to recommend Collingwood and Confused.com if you're learning to drive. You need to be insured, as I explained earlier. It is illegal to drive without insurance, and Collingwood are great if you want to insure yourself on a friend or family member's car, because you can do so without affecting their policy or risking their no claims bonus, which can help keep that relationship between supervisor and learner more positive, because there's less stress there. The supervisor's less stressed about their policy if you've got your own policy on their car. You can have short-term policies and long-term policies, and if you cancel a long-term policy, you get a pro rata refund for what you haven't used. So if a long-term policy is cheaper, it may be worth giving that a go, because you can cancel it. Using the link in the description, there's up to 35% off at the moment and a £20 Amazon gift card. Also, using the link does support this channel. If you want to compare many insurers to make sure you're definitely getting the best deal, check out confused.com. There's a link in the description to confused.com. Using that link does support this channel. Confused.com are great because they compare many insurers, and you can tailor the quote and adjust it without having to keep re-quoting. So you can add additional drivers, take additional drivers off, and play with your excess without having to keep redoing the quote. Anyway, until the next one, cheerio.